God damn it, guys. I don't know how many times I have to tell you, okay? Before you go on a road trip, make sure you check your oil, your spark plugs. Make sure your gas is full. That tank better be full as it can be. Because who knows what's going to happen when you get out on that freaking open road. There's some crazies out there, okay? God damn it. Let's review The Hills Have Eyes 2. The Hills Have Eyes 2 stars Jessica Strout, Daniela Alonso, and is directed by Martin Weitz. What is up, guys? If you remember, maybe a year ago now, I reviewed The Hills Have Eyes remake. And I reviewed it because I did like this top 10 remakes list, and I just got blasted with people saying, how could you not have The Hills Have Eyes remake on? And I had not seen that movie since it first came out, so I didn't remember it that well. So I reviewed the movie right after, and it's literally like one of the greatest horror remakes ever. It, by far, I think, is better than the original. Actually, it's that good. It was so good that I thought, you know what, I'm really curious to check out this sequel, because I've never seen the sequel to the remake, actually. And if I could share a story with you, I saw the sequel to the original at the drive-in movie theater back in 1986 as a double feature with Psycho 3. My sister and her boyfriend, they snuck me in the trunk. We drove in the drive-in and we watched it. And I think they showed Psycho 3 first because I remember that one very well. I always loved Psycho 3, but I didn't remember the original Hills Have Eyes 2 at all, and it was just so forgettable. That's all I remember about it. I remember it being just completely horrible. And so I'm thinking that Wes Craven might have wanted a little bit of redemption from that movie, because he pretty much made that movie because he needed the money. Because I think he was getting a divorce at the time or something like that, and he only had like an hour's worth of footage. And so they ended up using like some footage from the first movie to pad the movie. I guess kind of like what happened with Silent Night, Deadly Night 2, but that's a much more extreme case. But Wes Craven joined his son Jonathan Craven, and they pretty much wrote this script for The Hills Have Eyes 2.
What was that? What the fuck?
And in terms of a script, I think they had the right idea, because they wanted to go a lot more like claustrophobic, small scale on this one, isolated environment, and that's really what this is. And it's very different than the first movie, aside from the setting. You know, it's the same setting, being in like this Sector 16, I think it's called, in the New Mexico desert, where they're doing all this training. And of course, we have these mutants that live there because of all the fallout from World War II. And so, you know, all these mutant babies and all that stuff. We've covered that in the first review. And the first movie was so amazing, just because you really were invested in this family that got stuck in this location, and then they split off, and you were just rooting for them the whole time. And it was a scary ass movie. And it didn't pull any punches either. I mean, there was like scenes of rape in it and everything, but it was done very well. I mean, I don't know how you make a rape movie accessible, but I think they might have done it the best in that movie, because it's a movie I could totally watch again. Because I guess the thing is, they kind of gloss over it. It's not a scene, I don't even like saying it, it's not a rape scene that like goes on and lingers. I think that's when you get into trouble with rape scenes. Unless that's like your center plot line of the movie, like say Jodie Foster and The Accused, or Last House on the Left. But this one, not so much. But anyway, let's get into this second movie. And also, I was looking through my unbox videos, because I have a lot of unbox videos. I was trying to find the person that sent me The Hills Have Eyes 2. They sent me this double feature, and I couldn't remember who it was, and I didn't want to say the wrong name. So let me know down in the comments if you're the person that sent me this, so that way I can at least thank you and give you proper credit again. Because I really, surprisingly, enjoyed the sequel, and I thought for sure that I was not going to like it at all based on what I had heard. And I liked it so much that I sought out the Blu-ray, actually, and bought the Blu-ray through eBay, because for some reason it's a hard movie to find on Blu-ray through, at least in the US, through like Amazon and Best Buy. It's like out of print, you can't find it. But luckily I found it through the UK for a decent price, and so I'm gonna have the Blu-ray. But first off, quick plot synopsis. The characters in this, it's this military training group. They're part of the National Guard, and they're doing their training at this New Mexico location. And before they get to the danger zone where most of this movie takes place, there are these like scientists there and they come in contact with the mutants, and of course they get killed. And one of them happens to be like this colonel who plays into the story a little later, which I actually like that scene very much too, because that's when things really get like, holy shit. But anyway, you got this crew, they get there, they split off, and one of the characters, Missy, she gets attacked by one of the mutants. Played, by the way, by Derek Mears, who I didn't know Derek Mears was in this, but that scene's actually really cool too. Like, she's just sitting there in front of the rock, and you can't really see him. He's like a chameleon. And all of a sudden he just appears and he grabs her. And so for like the rest of the movie, Missy is stuck with this chameleon mutant. And so our main characters are Amber and Napoleon. They call him Napoleon, but Amber's played by Jessica Strauss, who I've seen in a few like TV shows here and there. She looked very familiar. But they started off light too. There's a nice funny moment with this like porta potty. That's the scene that you're probably going to remember the most about this movie. Whereas Napoleon, he goes in this porta potty, and literally these arms come up out of the porta potty, and this guy is completely like feces covered, and basically they have to save the guy. I don't know how he ends up crawling up out of a porta potty. It was hilarious though.
Shitman the Barbarian, I have no idea.
And Napoleon calls him Shitman the Barbarian. Maybe that'll be my like tagline to this. Hills Have Eyes 2, Shitman the Barbarian. I don't know, we'll see. But that's a nice light way to start this whole thing off. But I will say, like, the first probably 20 minutes of the movie, I was a little scared because I wasn't buying into these characters that much. The acting is not that great. It's okay, it's decent. So I started worrying. I was like, this doesn't even compare to the first movie whatsoever. But then they find their stride, especially once they get into the mine shaft. And it gets really dark, and this is where it becomes a different type of movie. You know, it becomes kind of like The Descent. You know, I was comparing this to The Descent actually quite a bit. And I think one thing too with like movies, especially horror movies that have military characters, I think because they have all that military getup and all you see is their face, it's a superficial thing. But I have a hard time really getting invested in the characters. So as superficial as it sounds, once they like took off their military getup and they started looking like normal people, then I started really investing in these characters, especially once they get into the mine shaft. And holy shit, once they get into the mine shaft, it gets really bloody as hell. One thing I really loved about this movie is just that aspect of how it didn't hold back, it didn't pull any punches. I was watching the behind the scenes, and when Wes Craven and his son wrote this script, one thing that Wes said was, for all the kills in this movie, I don't want to copy any other kills from other horror movies. If it's something that's been done before, then I'm going to scrap it. I'm going to rewrite it. And there's a lot of really fun and interesting kills in this movie. I really love the one where you got the one soldier and he's like climbing on the side of this rocky terrain, and then the mutant like reaches out and lifts him up with one hand and just chops his arm off and drops him. That was pretty damn creative. I've never seen anything like that. And it also set up how strong these damn mutants were. Like, they weren't playing around at all. They had like superhuman strength, like freakish strength. But just to backtrack a little bit, I was talking about that colonel earlier, right? So they all come upon this colonel, and at this point, they don't realize the danger that they're in. And then they see the colonel laying there against the rock because he got dealt with pretty heavily earlier in the movie. And so he's all like bloodied, you know, to the nines. And he just freaking offs himself, like right there in front of all of them. And it was a really intense scene, and it set up where we were gonna go from that point on in terms of tone in this movie. Now, our main character in this really is Amber and Napoleon. Especially Amber, actually. She's the one that we're like rooting for the most, I think, the whole time. And originally, Amber was actually going to be the character Brenda from the first movie, the actress that was actually in Lost. And that's the reason why she couldn't do this movie, because she was in Lost. So that would have been interesting if they would have brought her back, because that character, I guess, joined the National Guard. And so she ends up coming back to this site. So it would have been a thing like The Descent 2. And the big problem with that, and I'm glad they didn't bring her back, is because everybody says, why in the hell would this person ever come back to that danger zone? That's the big thing that people had a problem with The Descent 2. No way in hell Sarah would ever go back to that site. So I'm kind of glad that they just went with a clean slate on this one. And I really liked Jessica Strauss in this. She was very good as Amber. And I'm not taking anything away from the eye candy either, nothing. But she's one of those final girls that's definitely put to the test. Like there's this one scene where like the floor drops out from under her and it's, you know, she's like waist deep in water. So she falls through the floor and then the water comes down over her. And she literally had to do that scene. You know, she had to do a lot of her own stunts. You know, she stated that it was a very, very grueling shoot. And you can tell too. I think when you're watching these movies, you know, by the close-ups, by the camera angles, you can tell if the actual actor did the stunts or if it was just a stuntman. And there's a lot of scenes you can tell that's her, which made you buy into the character a lot more. People take that for granted, but I actually think that's important. I like when you can see the actors actually doing the stunts. Tom Cruise ruined it for everybody. Oh, and one more little behind-the-scenes factoid that I found interesting about this was that the women are kept alive for breeding. And that's something that they address in this movie. And the opening of this movie is an actual character that's giving birth to one of the mutant kids. Carpenter actually had a script called Prey that was never made into a movie before this movie came out that was a very similar type of premise. But instead, it mostly took place in the woods instead of this like rocky terrain. That plays a big part into this movie because the character Missy, this poor girl, I mean, throughout the whole movie, she's captured by this chameleon and she literally gets raped. Again, it's one of these mongoloid freaking movies where, you know, they rape the victims. But it's handled well in this one too because, like I said, it's a quick scene, it goes by. But it really sets the tone for how horrible this is for this character, for Missy. I liked Danielle Alonso's performance in this as Missy, actually. And she was a character like Amber that you wanted to see make through this. But in the end too, and this ties into probably the biggest thing I love about this movie is that it is just fun and it's bloody as hell. It does not hold back whatsoever. There's stuff like this all throughout this movie. And it surprised me. I didn't expect to like this as much as I did, but I was in it. And it does help to have a nice sound system. This is one of those horror movies that utilizes a good sound system. There's a lot of bass in the lows in the movie, especially when you're inside this like mine shaft. Your sound design is going to be very important. And luckily, it's done really well. I felt like I was actually in that mine shaft with these characters. But I was drawing a lot of comparisons to The Descent in this movie, like I stated earlier, you know, with these characters and how everybody's just completely freaking out. But I've pretty much stated the cons of this movie, okay? Like I said, the first act of the movie, not the best, especially in terms of like acting. They get the job done, okay? But it's nothing to write home about. But luckily they make up for the rest of the movie. And it's definitely one, you know, that I want to watch again. I mean, so much so that I went and bought the Blu-ray. So for a rating, I think I'm going to give The Hills Have Eyes to a low purchase worthy. It looks bad because the original movie is so much better, like one of the best remakes out there. But if you take that away, this actually is still a really good and fun movie. Not perfect, but really fun. So anyway, guys, that's my review for The Hills Have Eyes 2. Have you seen it? Let me know in the comments. Let me know what you guys think. I know I'm going to get a lot of varied responses on this one. Also, be sure to come over to Killer Flicks where we talk horror all day and every day on Fridays. We do Free for Fridays. Follow me at Drumdums on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. Have a great day, and Drumdum out.